Hi, this is Pastor Andy Morgan, and today we are starting a message series looking at the stories of Jesus at the lake. Jesus spent most of his years in ministry in the city of Capernaum, which is on the shores of Lake Gennesaret, which is also known as the Sea of Galilee. Some of the most important stories we have of Jesus take place on or near the lake, and we're going to hear and learn from these stories as we spend time at our own lake here at Bald Eagle State Park. Today we're going to hear the first story we have of Jesus at the lake. Jesus was preaching to a crowd along the shore, but they were having a hard time hearing him. So he asked a few fishermen who were mending their nets along the shore if he could use their boat as a kind of floating stage. Simon and Andrew agreed and invited Jesus into their boat. Jesus got into the boat, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Well, even though Simon was weary from a long night of fishing, he obeyed Jesus. And when they had let down their nets, they caught such a huge number of fish that their nets began to break. Simon was astonished, and so were those with him. Jesus then said to them, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people." Today, just like those first fishermen, Jesus not only wants to enter into our boats, he wants us to be part of his mission. He invites us to move beyond what's comfortable and venture out into deeper water, where we can more fully embrace a life of purpose and service. Are you ready for Jesus to enter your boat? Are you ready to follow him? Thank you for joining me at the lake. Let's keep walking with Jesus together. Well, let me welcome you this morning. My name's Andy Morgan, and I'm glad that you are here. And we are beginning a new series called Jesus at the Lake. And I want to, first of all, thank Clayton and Kenton Filipovich, who helped create the videos. We're going to see a video every week that tells the story, one of the stories of Jesus at the lake. And I am appreciative of their gifts of time and their talents in putting those videos together. Jesus did spend a majority of his time in public ministry in the city of Capernaum, which is along the shores of Lake Gennesaret, also known as the Sea of Galilee. We have a picture of the lake. So here is, if I can, and I realize that, you probably can't see in the back this little tiny red dot. So you should all move up and sit in the front. No, I'm kidding. But here is the Sea of Galilee. It is the second lowest freshwater lake in the world. It sits at 700 feet below sea level. At its widest, about here, it's 12 miles long, and it's about 8 miles across at its widest. This is the city of Capernaum, where Jesus spent most of his time in ministry. The headwaters of the lake come from the Caesarea Philippi area. So here is Lake Gennesaret, the Sea of Galilee. And up in this area, up in the mountains, Caesarea Philippi, Mount Hermon, are the headwaters. And it drains down. The headwaters come down into the Sea of Galilee. And then the sea empties out into the Jordan River. And you can follow the Jordan River all the way down, where it empties into what is known as the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is the lowest. So we have the second lowest below sea level. The Dead Sea is the lowest. The Dead Sea does not drain out, so the water just stays there, eventually evaporates, and all of the salt and all of the minerals stay there. That's why it is incredibly salty. And when I was there, it's also, the mud is supposed to be very, healthy. And so I put mud all over my face, and then realized that to wash it off, I had to use incredibly salty water, which was, if you ever go there, don't put mud all over your face. Just going to tell you that right now. But this is the region, and Jesus grew up. You may know he grew up in Nazareth, which, if we can go back to the other map, Nazareth is up here, and this is actually up in the hill country. This is very low. There are mountains all coming up here, and so this is up in the hill country. That's where Jesus grew up. But at some point in time, probably near the time he started ministry, Jesus moved from Nazareth to Capernaum. And one of the reasons he moved there was it was a larger city. So there were more people to hear his message. Capernaum also sat on a major trade route, and so there were people who were coming through there. There were more people. The opportunity for the message of Jesus to spread was greater in Capernaum, and so that's one of the reasons why Jesus moved there. I personally like to think that another reason Jesus moved there is that he just wanted to be close to the water, because there's something nice about living on the water. I was fortunate enough to be able to grow up along the shores of Long Island Sound. My grandmother had a house right on the beach, and it was a summer cottage, but we lived in it year-round. It was cold in the winter. My bedroom, I continued to tell my parents, my bedroom was the only room in the house that had no heat. And so they would put the little, space heater in there. But we lived in that house for 4 years. And so I grew up with the smell of the ocean, the sound of the waves, the sound of seagulls, that natural beauty and that way of life of just being close to the water. My hometown, the main road of my hometown, travels right along the shore. And so just about anywhere you are, you can either see or smell or just feel that you are close to the water. And it is wonderful. To this day, water still has a draw for me. I love being near the water. And I have to believe, maybe it's just because I grew up on the water, I have to believe that Jesus was just drawn to water because it's so beautiful. Clearly, this town, Capernaum, was a strategic location, and Jesus, as you might know, and we're going to hear today, the first people he called to follow him were fishermen. So they were there in Capernaum. They had a business in Capernaum. So Jesus spent most of his time and ministry at Lake Gennesaret. And the first story that we heard today is the story of Jesus calling those fishermen, calling the disciples. And so again, just part of that is one day as Jesus was standing by the Lake of Gennesaret, the people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. Because sound travels so well across the water, what Jesus wanted to do was actually get into the boat, use it as kind of a platform or a stage, go out just a little way, and then he could teach and preach, and more people could hear. They could gather along, and they could hear him better. And so there's a practical reason why Jesus does this, but I think Jesus also knows that there's going to be something more to come. And so he asked Simon, Peter, and Andrew if he could use their boats, and they agreed. This did not require an awful lot of them. I mean, Jesus just got into the boat. They just moved out a few feet from shore. They could maybe still wash their nets, tend their boat, get things ready. And so this wasn't an inconvenient request. Jesus just needed a little bit from them. And so after a period of teaching and preaching, Jesus turned to Simon and said, "How about going out into deep water? How about going out into the deep water and fishing? Cast your nets over the side." Well, this request was a little more inconvenience for Simon. He knew this was going to be a waste of time and energy. As an experienced fisherman, he knew you don't go fishing during the day. The sun reflecting on the water scares the fish. They're not going to come to the surface. Simon also knew there are no fish out there. I fished those waters all night long, and there was nothing. And so I'm sure Simon is thinking, Jesus, you're a rabbi, you're a teacher. What do you know about fishing? You grew up in Nazareth, where there is no fishing. You grew up, in a carpenter's shop. You don't know anything about fishing. This is really inconvenient. It's not the right time to go fishing. But Simon did it. And he went out into deeper water. And then he worked to throw his nets in. And as the nets are in the water, they begin to move. and shimmer, and fish, hundreds of them begin to come up to the surface of the water. They're caught up in the net. They start pulling in the net. It was so full of fish that they had to call James and John, their partners, to get in the other boat and to go out and help them bring all of the fish in. And so there's this huge catch of fish. And it tells Simon that Jesus is certainly more than just a rabbi. There was something going on. And this moment changed Simon's life. He knew that Jesus was a holy man of God, maybe the Messiah. And so he humbles himself. He understands the holiness of Jesus and the sinfulness of his own life. He felt so unworthy to be in the presence of Jesus that he tells Jesus, "You should go away from me. I'm not worthy." But instead of going away, or instead of chastising Simon for his sin, Jesus invites him to follow him. "Come follow me," he said. And instantly, Simon leaves his nets, he leaves the boats, he leaves his family, he leaves his home, he drops everything, and he follows Jesus. It was a defining moment that changed Simon's life, disguised as an inconvenience. A defining moment disguised as an inconvenience. Many defining moments in our lives come disguised as an inconvenience. Something that we really don't want to do, something that we weren't expecting to have to do, something that's going to take time or energy, but something that as we look back on it, we realize that moment of inconvenience changed my life. When I was in seminary, I was struggling to figure out what I wanted to do. I thought maybe a chaplain. I thought, I knew I wanted to go into full-time ministry, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't think it was the local church, and so I was really struggling. And at Duke, you have to do 2 placements of field education, and they pay you pretty well to help cover all of your expenses. And so I was going to do my 2 units of field education during the summer so that I didn't have to work during the academic year, partly because I didn't think I was smart enough to be at Duke. And so if I was working, then I wasn't going to have enough time to study. And so I was hoping to do, these field education placements during the summer. And so the first summer comes, and I apply, and they say, "We want you to do something else. We want you to go out and do this program that might help you discern your call." I'm like, I don't want to do that. Number 1, I just didn't want to do it. Number 2, it wasn't going to pay me anything. And they said, "We really want you to do this. In other words, you're going to do this." And so I did. And it was an inconvenience. I did the program, and it was good. It was a good program, and I learned something from it. But it was an inconvenience, because what it meant was when I went back to school, I now needed to have a year-long placement because I needed the money. And so I applied for a field education placement that would go for a year. And I got one, and they sent me out about an hour outside of Durham, North Carolina, to a little town called Graham, North Carolina. So that was an inconvenience. It was inconvenient that I had to work and go to school because I wasn't sure how that was going to go. And then it was an inconvenience because the placement was an hour in another direction. And so for a year, I worked at Mount Hermon United Methodist Church. And it was a defining moment disguised as an inconvenience. Because it was spending a year in that church that I began to understand that actually, as much as I had been pushing away the idea of being, a full-time pastor, that actually was what felt really good for me. It seemed like the perfect fit. And so I put away all of the other ideas I had of full-time ministry, and I began to focus on just being a pastor in a local church. Like that's what God made me for. It was a defining moment that came through a series of inconveniences. If you are facing a situation that seems inconvenient, I don't have the time or the energy for this. Maybe God is going to use this moment and this situation to change or define your life. God might be working through unplanned and difficult circumstances so that you can be able to grab hold of the life, maybe a vocation, maybe a mission, a ministry, a volunteer opportunity that will define you, will shape you, will help you live your fullest life and live out the faith that God has for you. Is there an inconvenience that you're facing now that could actually be the defining moment for your future? If God is calling you out to do something that doesn't seem convenient, something that seems difficult, something that maybe you just don't want to do, can you consider moving forward? Have you been invited by someone to work somewhere, to volunteer somewhere, to serve somewhere, to experience something, to try something, and inside you're kind of saying, I don't think I really want to do it, but you just can't get to the place of saying no? Or maybe it just keeps coming back to you again and again. It's like, God keeps bringing this opportunity or this situation back to me, and so maybe I need to consider what this is all about. Maybe God wants to use this inconvenience to define your future. God's call in our lives is often inconvenient. The call of God from a burning bush to Moses was an inconvenience. Moses was now living in Midian, hundreds of miles away from Egypt. He didn't want to go back. He had created a new life for himself. He was married. He was tending sheep. He was part of a family. And this was going to be an inconvenience to return to Egypt, to return to his people who had kind of, cast him out. It was going to be inconvenient. He didn't want to do it. But he obeyed the call, and it defined the rest of his life. The call to bring a child into the world was not convenient for Mary and Joseph. They weren't married. There was a census coming, which meant that everyone was going to be traveling everywhere. This was not the right time or place for a baby. And yet they submitted to the call. They invited the Holy Spirit into their lives, and it defined them. It forever changed them. When Jesus called Matthew to follow him, it was inconvenient. Matthew was at work as a tax collector. You walk away from the booth, you walk away from your job with Rome, you don't have a job in the future. You can't go back. Matthew is cutting off all opportunity to return to work, employment, finances, a future. He's turning his back on all of that in a moment. It was inconvenient. He didn't have time to think about it or plan about it or figure out his future. It was inconvenient, but it forever changed his life. We see in the Bible again and again these inconvenient moments that when people say yes to Jesus, yes to God, yes to the invitation that is coming their way, it defines them. It defines their future. It defines the church, the people of God. It defines the world. Inconvenient and unexpected moments are often what define the people of God, a community. I can point to several inconvenient moments in my years of ministry that defined a church. In Altoona, we had just done a week-long vacation Bible school, and we had a lot of kids from the neighborhood, and someone came to me and said, we should keep this going for all these kids. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's inconvenient. We don't have a plan. We don't have money. We don't have, a lot of people on board for this. It seemed like a huge inconvenience, and yet we said, okay, God, we'll just take a step forward and we'll do this for the rest of the summer. The summer comes to an end, and they come to me and they said, Andy, we got to keep this going because if we end this now, we're going to lose connection with all these kids. And I'm like, okay, this is inconvenient. Like, we don't have the time. We don't have the money. We don't have the opportunity. And then they said, oh, and we want to expand it and provide dinner. I'm like, what? We don't have anything in place to do this. It's inconvenient. It's difficult. It's unexpected. This was not what we were planning. But we said yes. An after-school program started that is still going on today. And it has defined a church and their outreach to their neighbors. It was a defining moment disguised as an inconvenience. In Lewisburg, I arrived at a worship planning meeting late. I had another meeting to go to, and so I got there late. And when I got there, they said, Andy, it's all taken care of. We're planning a new worship service. It's going to be at 12 noon on Sundays. All we need you to do is preach. I said, oh, really? How's this going to work? They're like, well, it's going to be for college students, and so, here's the person who's going to do some music, and this is how it's going to go, and all you have to do is preach. That's what they told me. All you have to do. I was like, right. No, I'm going to have to do a lot more. Like, I've now got to take this to the larger church and say, hey, we're going to reach out to college students who have no money. And we're going to, so they're not going to be contributing anything. And we're going to do a worship service for them. And we're going to, provide, lunch, kind of a light lunch for them every Sunday at 12 noon. And not everyone was in favor of it by a long shot. And I'm like, this really isn't convenient. It's not the right time. We're dealing with other conflict. Like, is this really what we need to do? It was difficult. But the conviction of those around me was so clear that we said yes, and we worked through the inconvenience, and we worked through the conflict, and we worked through the challenges. And what we started was an outreach to college students that drew in 40, 50 college students every Sunday. And it defined the church, defined who we were, our ability to reach out into the community. We ventured out into deeper water. We put down some nets. We started pulling in fish. It was a defining moment for our church. Defining moments, whether it's for our life, whether it's for a congregation, they often come and are seen disguised kind of as an inconvenience. Hey, maybe you never thought about this, but let's try this. Hey, Simon Peter, let's just go out into deeper water. Why don't you put your nets down? Well, Jesus, that doesn't make any sense. But because you say so, God, what I hear you calling me to do doesn't make any sense. But because you say so, we're going to move forward. Simon was willing to be inconvenienced. He took his boat into deeper water. He put down his nets. He brought in a huge catch of fish. And then he looked at Jesus and realized that Jesus was so holy and godly and good. And he knew he wasn't. And in that moment, he humbles himself and he said, you need to go away. Like you just have to go away because my sin is so strong and deep and wide. And Jesus didn't go away. And in fact, he reached out and called Simon to follow him. So think of this. Jesus steps into the sinfulness of Simon's life. He didn't really step into the boat. I mean, he did. He stepped into the boat, and the boat went out. But he actually was stepping into the sinfulness of Simon's life, saying to Simon, not only can I forgive you, but I can use you to build my kingdom. Actually, I think what Jesus would have said, he would have stepped into Simon's life and say, I want to forgive you, and I want to use you to build my kingdom. With me in your life, you have all that it takes. I think Jesus is stepping into the sinfulness of our lives. We don't feel worthy. We don't feel like we have what it takes. Like the Apostle Paul, we can say, I know my sin and it's always before me. The things I want to do, I don't do. The things I don't want to do, I do. What a wretched man am I? Who will save me from this sin? That's how we feel. And Jesus steps into the sinfulness of our lives. And what he says to us is what he said to Simon. I want to forgive you. And I want to use you to build my kingdom, to be part of what I'm doing in the world. I believe that Jesus is stepping into our lives. He's like, can I use your life to proclaim the gospel? Can I use your life to share my love and my grace? And some of us are thinking, there's no way you can use me. I'm just too far gone. I'm too sinful. I don't have what it takes. And Jesus is like, no. I want to forgive you, and I want to use you to further my kingdom. Jesus wants to step into the sinfulness of our lives, to forgive us, and to invite us to follow him. It might be inconvenient. The situation he may be calling you to could be challenging and difficult. You might not feel like you have what it takes to say yes, to do what God's asking you to do. But if we will step out in faith, if we'll be willing to venture out into deeper water, today could be the defining moment of our lives. Would you pray with me?